I never expected love to find me in a dimly lit theater, but damn if life doesn't have a sense of humor. That night was supposed to be my escape, just one evening away from the constant pressure of professional volleyball, where I could lose myself in someone else's story instead of living my own. The experimental play was exactly what I needed after the grueling season we'd just wrapped up. Intersections of Desire, they called it. Pretentious title, sure, but I was desperate for anything that wasn't a volleyball court. The Henderson Community Theater wasn't exactly Broadway, but it had character, peeling paint and all. That's when I saw her. Across the aisle, 3 rows up. Dark brunette hair falling in waves over one shoulder as she leaned forward, completely absorbed in the performance. Green eyes that caught the stage lights when she turned slightly. I couldn't stop staring, which was ridiculous. Bailey James doesn't stare at strangers. I'm usually the one being stared at. At intermission, I headed for the bar. One glass of wine wouldn't hurt my training regimen. As I reached for the last glass on the bartender's tray, another hand, slender, with short nails and a silver ring on the index finger, reached for the same glass. Our fingers brushed. Electric. Sorry, she said, pulling back. Those green eyes up close were even more intense. Please, take it, I offered, though I desperately needed that wine. Split it? The suggestion came with a half smile that did something strange to my stomach. And that's how Sarah Taylor and I ended up sharing both wine and opinions about the first act. She was passionate about the director's choices in a way that made me want to argue with her just to keep the conversation going. The symbolic emptiness of the center stage clearly represents the void in modern relationships, she insisted. I laughed. Or maybe they just couldn't afford more props. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger but in challenge. Cynical, aren't you? Realistic, I corrected, taking a deliberate sip from our shared glass. When the play ended, with an ambiguous scene that I still don't understand, I found myself reluctant to leave her company. I surprised myself by suggesting coffee. Now? It's almost 11, she pointed out, checking her watch. Henderson never sleeps, I said, though that was a blatant lie about our sleepy little city. There's a place 2 blocks down that stays open late. Over coffee that night, I learned Sarah was a volleyball coach. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't mention my profession. I wanted one night where I wasn't Bailey James the volleyball player. Just Bailey, a woman captivated by another woman's mind. We argued about the play, politics, and whether pineapple belongs on pizza. The cafe was closing when we finally noticed the time. Walking her to her car, something shifted in the air between us. She stopped suddenly under a streetlight, the yellow glow catching the gold flecks in her green eyes. I enjoyed this, she said softly. Unexpected, but nice. And then she leaned in. The kiss was gentle, testing, questioning. Her lips were soft against mine, tasting of coffee and possibility. I responded before my brain could catch up with my body, my hands finding her waist. When we pulled apart, her smile held a promise I wasn't sure either of us was ready to make. "Good night, Bailey," she whispered, slipping into her car. What I didn't know then was that Monday morning would bring the most awkward team meeting of my career, when Sarah Taylor would walk in as our new head coach. Monday morning hit me like a hangover. Our team manager had gathered us in the gymnasium for what she called an exciting announcement. I was half zoned out, still thinking about mysterious green eyes from Saturday night, when the gym doors swung open. And there she was, Sarah Taylor. Same captivating presence, but now in Henderson Volleyball Club athletic wear, clipboard in hand. "Ladies, meet your new head coach," our manager announced proudly. The room spun slightly as Sarah's eyes found mine. A flicker of recognition, then nothing, her face smoothed into professional neutrality. Mine probably looked like I'd seen a ghost. "Thank you for the warm welcome," Sarah addressed the team, her voice steady. "I'm excited to take the Henderson Falcons to the next level this season." During her speech about expectations and excellence, I couldn't focus on anything except the surreal situation. Just 48 hours ago, her lips had been on mine. Now she was my damn coach. Practice began immediately after introductions. No chance to talk privately, no moment to address the elephant in the room. Maybe that was for the best. "James," she barked. "Your approach is lazy, again." I reset my position, feeling everyone's eyes on me. Was she being harder on me, or was I imagining it? "Again, your timing is off." She demonstrated the correct form, her athletic body moving with precision that would have been mesmerizing under different circumstances. Now it just felt like torture. 3 hours of her pushing me to my absolute limit. When practice finally ended, I was drenched in sweat and simmering with confusion. "James, a word?" she called as everyone headed to the showers. We waited in uncomfortable silence until the gym emptied. "This is awkward," she finally said, eyes meeting mine directly. "That's an understatement," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Saturday night can't happen again," Sarah said firmly. "I didn't know you were on the team when you kissed me," I finished for her. Her cheeks colored slightly. "I'm your coach now. There are rules, professional boundaries." "I get it." "I didn't mean I liked it." "Good. That's good." She sounded less convinced than her words suggested. The team dinner that evening was Coach Taylor's idea, a bonding experience at Henderson's only decent steakhouse. I deliberately sat across the table from her, not trusting myself to maintain appropriate distance otherwise. Between appetizers and entrees, Sarah shared stories about her college volleyball days. I watched her animate a particularly dramatic championship point, hands gesturing expressively, and felt an uncomfortable tug of attraction I had no business feeling. "What about you, Bailey?" she asked suddenly. "What made you choose volleyball?" Our eyes locked across bread baskets and water glasses. For a moment, it felt like we were back at that late-night cafe. "My dad," I answered honestly. "He coached high school volleyball before his accident. I originally played to make him happy, then discovered I actually loved it." "Your father had an accident?" Her voice softened with genuine concern. "Construction site fall when I was 15. He's in a wheelchair now." Something shifted in her expression. "My mother has MS," she said quietly. "That's partly why I moved back to Henderson, to be closer." The table conversation flowed around us, but we'd carved out a small private exchange. Learning about her family, her competitive history, the parallels in our lives, it created a connection that had nothing to do with Saturday night's kiss, and everything to do with who we were as people. By dessert, I understood the impossible situation perfectly. Sarah Taylor wasn't just an attractive woman who'd kissed me once. She was someone I could genuinely like, someone I might even respect, and now she was the one person I absolutely couldn't have. As we all left the restaurant, she caught my eye briefly. The regret there was unmistakable. Not regret for what had happened, but for the timing that made anything more impossible. "Good night, Coach," I said pointedly. "Good night, Bailey," she replied, and I heard the careful distance she placed in those 3 words. "Your defensive positioning needs work," Sarah said one evening after everyone else had left practice. "You're telegraphing your moves." 2 weeks had passed since the awkward revelation of her coaching position. We'd established a careful professional relationship, all proper distances maintained during team practices. But tension lingered in every interaction, unspoken but palpable. "I can help you with that," she continued. "If you're interested in some extra coaching." "Private sessions with Sarah? Bad idea, terrible idea." "Sure," I heard myself say. "When?" That's how our Tuesday and Thursday late-night sessions began. The gym empty except for us, the squeak of our shoes on the polished floor, and the occasional thud of the ball. Professional, technical, safe. Until it wasn't. "You're still dropping your elbow." Sarah demonstrated the correct form, stepping behind me to adjust my positioning. Her hands on my shoulders, her breath near my ear. Time seemed to slow as neither of us moved away. "Like this?" I asked, my voice embarrassingly unsteady. Her hands slid down my arms, correcting my angle. "Better," she murmured, finally stepping back. These moments, brief touches, lingering glances, became more frequent as weeks passed. Always followed by one of us creating distance, remembering the rules we'd agreed to follow. Then came the ankle. A particularly aggressive dive during practice sent me crashing into the court divider. Pain shot through my left ankle immediately. Sarah was at my side before anyone else, her coach's calm masking the concern I could see in her eyes. "Can you put weight on it?" she asked, kneeling beside me. I tried and winced. "Not really." "Hospital," she decided. "It's just a sprain," I protested. But she was already directing 2 teammates to help me to her car. The doctor confirmed my self-diagnosis, a moderate sprain that required rest, ice, and elevation. When the team manager offered to drive me home from the medical center, Sarah interrupted. "I've got it covered," she said with an authority that brooked no argument. "Team needs you back at practice." The car ride to my apartment was quiet, thick with things unsaid. She insisted on helping me inside, despite my protests that I could manage with the crutches. "You live on the 3rd floor with no elevator," she pointed out reasonably. "Don't be stubborn." My apartment was embarrassingly messy, training clothes draped over chairs, dishes in the sink, half-read books scattered on every surface. "Sorry about the chaos," I muttered as she helped me to the couch. "I've seen worse," she said with a small smile. "Where's your first aid kit?" She found ice packs in my freezer and expertly wrapped my ankle, her touch gentle but confident. Then, unexpectedly, she started cleaning up, gathering dishes, straightening books. "You don't have to do that," I protested. "I know," she replied simply, continuing anyway. As evening deepened into night, our carefully maintained professional boundaries softened. She ordered takeout. We watched a terrible action movie. She laughed at my commentary, relaxed in a way I'd never seen her at practice. "I should go," she said when the movie ended, but made no move to leave. The moments stretched between us, fragile and dangerous. "Sarah," I began, not sure what I planned to say. She moved then, crossing the distance between us. The kiss was nothing like our first, not tentative but hungry, as if we'd both been holding back too long. Her hands framed my face, and mine found her waist, pulling her closer. When she finally pulled away, her green eyes were darker than usual. "This is such a bad idea," she whispered, not sounding convinced. "Terrible," I agreed, already drawing her back to me. She stopped my movement, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "We can't, Bailey. Not while I'm your coach." Reality crashed back. She was right. "I should really go," she said again, this time standing. At the door she paused. "Take care of that ankle. I need my best player back on the court." That night marked a turning point. We never spoke about the kiss, but something had changed. Coffee shops became our neutral territory, away from the gym and team dynamics. Every Wednesday morning, we'd meet at Henderson Brew, ostensibly to discuss training strategies. But we talked about everything except volleyball, her childhood in Colorado, my college years, books we'd both read, places we wanted to travel. We created a small world where we weren't coach and player, just two women who enjoyed each other's company. A dangerous fantasy, perhaps, but one I couldn't bring myself to give up. The whispers started 3 weeks after my ankle injury. I first noticed it during warm-ups. Melissa and Jen huddled together, glancing in my direction before quickly looking away when I caught them. "They're talking about us," I told Sarah during our Wednesday coffee meeting, keeping my voice low despite the bustling cafe. Sarah stirred her latte slowly, green eyes troubled. "I know. Rebecca mentioned something yesterday." "What did she say?" I asked, trying to sound casual though my heart was racing. "She asked if there was anything special between us." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her dark hair. "Said the team had noticed how much time we spend together." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that I'm giving you extra coaching because of your potential." She met my eyes, but I don't think she believed me. We were careful, damn it, professional at practice, maintaining appropriate distance. But perhaps our efforts to act normal only highlighted what we were trying to hide. The harder you try to ignore attraction, the more obvious it becomes. The following day confirmed my fears. The usual pre-practice chatter died when I entered the locker room. Melissa, our team captain, approached me while I changed. "Got a minute, James?" Her tone was carefully neutral. "What's up?" I tried to sound normal, continuing to lace up my shoes. "Some of the girls are wondering about you and Coach Taylor." My hands froze momentarily. "What about us?" "Come on, Bailey, the private sessions, the coffee meetings." She lowered her voice. "You two have chemistry." "She's my coach," I stated flatly. Nothing inappropriate is happening. Not technically a lie. Nothing had happened since that night at my apartment, though not for lack of wanting. Melissa studied me. "Well, whatever isn't happening is affecting the team. People feel like you're getting special treatment." "That's ridiculous," I snapped, louder than intended. The locker room fell silent. Heat crawled up my neck as I realized everyone was listening. This was exactly what we'd been trying to avoid. Practice that day was tense. Sarah must have sensed it because she pushed us harder than usual, allowing no time for gossip or side conversations. She barely looked at me directly, maintaining strict professional distance. It hurt more than it should have. 2 days later, things escalated. Sarah called me into her office after practice, her expression grim. "Close the door," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" William Turner came to see me. William was the team owner, a former athlete with old-school values and a sizable investment in the club's reputation. "What did he want?" I asked, though I already knew. "He's heard rumors." She looked exhausted. "Nothing specific, just that there might be unprofessional relations between coach and player." "Damn," I breathed. "What did you say?" I assured him the rumors were unfounded, that our relationship is strictly professional. Her voice caught slightly on the word relationship. He reminded me about morality clauses in my contract. The implications were clear. Sarah's career was at risk, the coaching position she'd worked years to secure. "This is my fault," I said. "The private sessions, the coffee." "Stop," she interrupted. "This is no one's fault, but we need to be smarter." She took a deep breath. "We can't meet outside of team practice anymore. No coffee, no private sessions, at least until the season ends." The logical part of me understood. The selfish part wanted to argue. "Bailey," she said softly, seeing my expression. "My career is on the line, and yours too." "I get it," I replied, trying to keep emotion from my voice. That night, I couldn't sleep. By morning, I'd made a decision that felt like the only solution. I contacted the manager of the Riverside Raptors, a team in the neighboring county that had tried to recruit me last season. When I told my teammates I was considering a transfer, the reactions were mixed. Some seemed genuinely sorry, others relieved, as if my departure would solve the uncomfortable tension in the team. I didn't tell Sarah. I couldn't face her yet. But news travels fast in competitive sports. She cornered me in the locker room after everyone had left. Her face was a storm of emotions. "You're transferring?" Her voice echoed off the metal lockers. "When were you going to tell me?" I thought it would be easier. "Easier?" She cut me off. "Running away is easier?" "I'm trying to protect your career," I shot back. "Isn't that what you want?" "What I want," she began, then stopped herself. The air between us charged with everything unsaid. "This isn't about what I want, this is about our team." "Is it?" I challenged. "Or is it about us avoiding what's happening here?" She stepped closer. "There is no us, Bailey. There can't be." Those words hurt more than any injury I'd sustained on the court. Because despite all logic and professional boundaries, I'd begun to hope there could be. The weekend tournament in Carson City was supposed to be our chance to qualify for regionals. We'd been training for months, and despite the tension between Sarah and me, our team was playing better than ever. I'd put my transfer request on hold, unwilling to abandon my teammates mid-season. We'd just finished our second match, a solid win, when the sky outside the sports complex turned an ominous dark gray. "That doesn't look good," Melissa said, staring out the high windows of the gymnasium. The tournament organizer rushed in moments later. "Everyone stay inside. Flash flood warning has been issued for the entire county." Sarah immediately gathered our team. "Stay calm, we're on high ground here." The rain started shortly after. Not gentle drops but sheets of water slamming against the building with frightening force. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. "Highway's already flooded," someone called out, staring at their phone. "They're closing all roads back to Henderson." We were stranded. 8 teams, coaches, staff, and a handful of spectators, nearly 200 people trapped in the sports complex. Around midnight, when it became clear no one was going anywhere, the facility manager started distributing emergency blankets and opening storage rooms for makeshift sleeping areas. "We need to organize," Sarah told our team. "People are getting anxious." That's when the first displaced families arrived. Locals evacuated from lower-lying areas, directed to the sports complex by emergency services. Scared children, worried parents, elderly people needing medication. Without discussion, Sarah and I fell into coordinating roles. She organized the gymnasium into sections, sleeping areas, medical needs, information center. I handled incoming families, assigning spaces and documenting names. "We need more blankets," I told her around 3 a.m. our first moment alone since the crisis began. She looked exhausted but determined. The storage room might have more. Come with me? The storage room was small and dimly lit by emergency lights. We searched through equipment bins, finding more blankets and some first aid supplies. You're good in a crisis, she said quietly, watching me organize the supplies. So are you, I replied. Guess that coaching authority comes in handy. A small smile touched her lips, the first genuine one I'd seen in weeks. Being around you makes me better, she admitted suddenly, even when it's complicated. Before I could respond, a crash of thunder shook the building, and the emergency lights went out. Complete darkness enveloped us. I felt Sarah's hand find mine. Don't move, she whispered. There's equipment everywhere. Her hand was warm, steady. We stood perfectly still, listening to the storm rage outside. Bailey, she said, her voice different somehow, softer. If something happens. Nothing's going to happen, I cut her off, squeezing her hand. But if it does, she insisted, I need you to know that I've never regretted anything except not being honest about how I feel. The emergency lights flickered back on, illuminating her face inches from mine. The professional mask was gone, replaced by raw vulnerability that stole my breath. I don't know who moved first. In crisis, normal boundaries dissolve, revealing what truly matters. Her lips found mine with an urgency that matched the storm outside. My back pressed against metal shelving as her body aligned with mine, hands tangling in my hair. We shouldn't, I gasped when we broke apart, though my body screamed otherwise. I know, she agreed, but her hands still gripped my waist. Everything's upside down. Sarah, I whispered, but whatever I planned to say vanished as her mouth reclaimed mine. Time suspended in that storage room. The storm, the flood, the stranded families all momentarily forgotten as need overrode reason. Her hand slipped beneath my team jersey, exploring with a hunger that matched my own. I pulled her closer, craving the weight of her against me. We might have gone further if not for the walkie-talkie crackling to life on her belt. Coach Taylor? A voice interrupted. Medical emergency in the north section. Reality crashed back. Sarah pulled away, her breathing uneven. On my way, she responded, never taking her eyes off mine. For 3 days, the flood kept us trapped in the sports complex. 3 days of working side by side with Sarah, organizing food distribution, arranging sleeping areas, entertaining frightened children. 3 days of stolen glances and brief touches that carried the memory of that storage room moment. The crisis brought clarity. Whatever was happening between us wasn't just attraction or forbidden temptation, it was something deeper, revealed when everything else was stripped away. On the third night, when most of the evacuees were sleeping, Sarah found me sitting alone by a window, watching emergency vehicles navigate the receding floodwaters. They say the roads should be clear by morning, she said, sitting beside me. Back to reality, I murmured. She took my hand, hidden from view between us. What happened in the storage room? Don't say you regret it, I interrupted. I was going to say it changed everything, she finished softly. At least for me. Before I could respond, a new group of emergency workers entered the gymnasium. Among them was a woman who would complicate our lives even further, though neither of us knew it yet. You're Bailey James, right? The volleyball player? The question came from a woman in a muddy emergency response uniform, her red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. I nodded, curious how she recognized me. Sarah's hand slipped from mine as the woman approached. Julie Johnson, she introduced herself with a tired smile. County Emergency Management. I've seen your games, you're incredible. Under normal circumstances, I'd have brushed off the compliment with practiced modesty. But after 3 days of crisis management, social niceties felt irrelevant. Thanks, I replied simply. Any news on when we can get back to Henderson? That's why I'm here, Julie said, her gray eyes brightening. We need volunteers to help coordinate the first supply runs tomorrow morning. Someone mentioned you two have been running things here. And that's how I found myself in Julie's mud-splattered truck at dawn, navigating partially flooded roads while Sarah stayed behind to manage the shelter. Julie was easy to talk to, competent, direct, with a dry humor that made the grim situation slightly more bearable. So, she said, as we loaded supplies at the emergency depot, you and Coach Taylor make quite a team. Something in her tone made me glance over. Her expression was casual, but her eyes were assessing. "We work well together," I replied carefully. "I can see that." Julie handed me a box of medical supplies. "She seems very protective of you." Heat crept up my neck. "We're close. The whole team is." Julie just smiled knowingly. When we returned to the sports complex, Sarah was directing the distribution of breakfast. Her eyes found mine immediately, then flickered to Julie beside me. "Coach Taylor," Julie greeted her with unnecessary warmth. "Your player here has been invaluable." "She usually is," Sarah replied, her tone professional but her eyes conveying something entirely different when they met mine. Over the next 3 days, as Henderson slowly recovered from the flooding, Julie became a constant presence. She requested me specifically for supply runs, community assessments, even volunteer coordination. Each time, her touches lingered a fraction too long, her compliments slightly too personal. "She's interested in you," Sarah observed tersely, after Julie had dropped me off at the gymnasium one evening. We were alone in the makeshift office, sorting through donation inventories. "She's just friendly," I replied, though I'd noticed it too. "Please," Sarah scoffed. "She finds excuses to touch you every time you're near her." I couldn't help smiling. "Are you jealous, Coach Taylor?" "Don't be ridiculous," she muttered, but the color in her cheeks betrayed her. "You have no reason to be," I said more softly, risking a step closer. Sarah's expression struggled between professional distance and personal desire. "Don't I? She can take you to dinner without risking her career. She can hold your hand in public." The stark reality of our situation hung between us. Whatever had shifted during the flood emergency, our fundamental problem remained unchanged. The next morning, Julie invited me to help assess a community center that had been serving as a temporary shelter. "Just you?" Sarah questioned when I mentioned the assignment. "She said they're short-staffed," I explained, ignoring her skeptical look. The community center was in worse shape than expected. Roof damage had led to significant water intrusion. Julie and I spent hours documenting the damage, working closely in the confined space. "You know," she said casually as we finished up, "when things settle down, I'd love to take you to dinner." I paused, clipboard in hand. "Julie?" "Just dinner," she clarified with a gentle smile. "No pressure. You seem like someone worth knowing better." Before I could respond, her radio crackled. Another emergency team needed assistance at a collapsed bridge section. We rushed to the site, finding chaotic conditions. The riverbank was still unstable, threatening to give way beneath the rescue equipment. Sarah was there, unexpectedly, helping coordinate the gymnasium residents who had volunteered. Her eyes widened when she saw me arrive with Julie. "You shouldn't be here," she called over to me. "It's not stable." "I've got this sector," Julie replied before I could, placing a hand on my arm. "We'll be careful." I saw Sarah's jaw tighten at the gesture. She turned away sharply, focusing on directing her volunteers. The tension between them grew palpable as we all worked the same site. Julie's attentiveness became more obvious, bringing me water, checking if I needed breaks, standing closer than necessary when reviewing maps. Then it happened. A section of the bank gave way without warning. Sarah was standing too close to the edge, focused on helping an elderly volunteer navigate the muddy terrain. "Sarah!" I screamed as the ground crumbled beneath her. Julie reacted instantly, lunging forward to grab Sarah's arm before she could slide down into the churning water below. For a terrifying moment, Sarah dangled at the edge, Julie straining to hold her weight. I scrambled to help, and together we pulled Sarah to safety. The three of us collapsed on solid ground, breathing heavily. "Thank you," Sarah said to Julie, genuine gratitude overcoming her previous animosity. Julie nodded, professional once more. "Just doing my job." But something had shifted in the dynamic between the three of us. As we walked back to the emergency vehicles, Julie fell into step beside me. "She really cares about you," Julie said quietly. "And I think it goes beyond coach and player." I started to deny it automatically, but Julie shook her head. "I saw how she looked when you called out her name," she continued, "and how you looked at her. That's complicated." "You have no idea," I muttered. Henderson slowly recovered as weeks passed. The gymnasium residents returned to homes or temporary housing, and our volleyball season resumed with a modified schedule. But nothing returned to normal between Sarah and me. She assigned assistant coaches to oversee my training sessions. During team practices, she maintained careful distance. We were cordial, professional, and completely disconnected. I told myself it was for the best. The rescue operation had been a wake-up call. Seeing Sarah nearly fall into that churning water had terrified me in a way that went beyond friendship or attraction. It felt too vulnerable, too real. "Earth to Bailey," Melissa waved a hand before my face after practice. "You've been staring at your locker for 5 minutes." "Just tired," I lied, gathering my things. Outside the gymnasium, Julie was waiting beside her truck. She'd traded her emergency response uniform for jeans and a simple green shirt that matched her eyes. "Thought you might want a ride," she offered with an easy smile. Julie had been persistent in the weeks following the flood. Coffee invitations turned into lunch meetups, which evolved into regular conversations that I found myself looking forward to. She was straightforward where Sarah was complex, available where Sarah was forbidden. "How was practice?" she asked as I climbed into her truck. "Fine," I replied automatically. "That convincing, huh?" She laughed, pulling into traffic. "Coach Taylor still avoiding you?" I shot her a look. Julie had an uncomfortable ability to see through pretense. "It's complicated," I said for perhaps the 100th time. "It doesn't have to be." Her voice was gentle. "Bailey, you've been miserable for weeks. Whatever's between you two, it's clearly at a standstill." She wasn't wrong. Sarah and I were locked in emotional limbo, unable to move forward, unwilling to fully let go. "I like you," Julie continued, eyes on the road. "You're talented, compassionate, and damn attractive. But I'm not interested in being someone's second choice." I never said. "You didn't have to." She pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and turned to face me. "I've seen how you look at her when you think no one's watching." My chest tightened. Was I that transparent? "Julie, It's okay," she interrupted. "I'm not asking for promises, just honesty." That evening, I couldn't sleep. Julie's words echoed in my mind, alongside memories of Sarah in that storage room during the flood, the urgency of her touch, the vulnerability in her eyes. Two paths diverging, neither simple. The next morning brought news that the Volleyball Federation had arranged a special recovery shift for flood relief. All teams would participate in different community rebuilding projects. Our team was assigned to help restore the riverfront park where children's sports leagues practiced. "Everyone needs to be there," Melissa told me over the phone. "Federation officials are coming to document the community service." Great. A full day of pretending Sarah and I were nothing more than coach and player, with Julie likely coordinating as part of emergency management. The riverfront was a mess of mud and debris. Our team split into groups, Sarah directing operations from a central tent. I deliberately volunteered for the farthest section, needing distance. Midway through the morning, Julie arrived with additional supplies. Her eyes found mine immediately, and she offered a small wave before heading to the coordination tent. Time crawled as I hauled waterlogged equipment and cleared debris. By afternoon, my muscles ached and mud covered me from head to toe. I was filling a wheelbarrow when a shadow fell across me. "You've been avoiding me," Sarah said quietly. I straightened slowly. "Taking my cue from you, coach?" Her eyes darkened at the deliberate formality. "Can we talk? Privately?" We walked to a secluded area behind the equipment truck. Sarah looked as exhausted as I felt, dark circles under her eyes. "Julie spoke to me earlier," she said without preamble. My stomach dropped. "About what?" "About you." Sarah's voice was tight. "She wanted to know if there was something real between us, or if I was just playing with your feelings." "What did you tell her?" I asked, heart pounding. Before she could answer, Melissa's voice called out, "Coach Taylor, Federation officials need you at the main tent." Sarah's expression flickered with frustration. "We need to finish this conversation." "Do we?" I challenged, sudden anger rising. "What's there to say? You've made your position clear." "Have I?" Her eyes flashed. "Because I'm not sure I've been clear about anything lately." The tension between us crackled like electricity. Julie appeared around the corner of the truck, stopping when she saw us. "They need both of you at the main tent," she said, eyes traveling between us. "Something about photos for the Federation." For a moment, the three of us stood in awkward triangle, Julie watching me watching Sarah, Sarah looking torn between duty and something much more complicated. "We'll be right there," Sarah finally said. As Julie turned to leave, she caught my eye with a look of resigned understanding. She'd seen enough to confirm what she already suspected. "Bailey," Sarah said once Julie had gone, "whatever you decide, just know that Coach Taylor," a Federation official's voice interrupted. "We're waiting on you." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the professional mask was back in place. "Let's go," she said, and walked away. A week after the riverfront cleanup, Henderson held a memorial service for the 7 people who had lost their lives in the flooding. The entire community gathered at the town square, emergency workers, volunteers, survivors, and all the sports teams who had helped during the crisis. I sat with my teammates, listening to the mayor's solemn speech about community resilience. Sarah stood with the other coaches at the side of the makeshift stage, her profile elegant and composed. Julie was among the emergency responders in the front row, occasionally glancing in my direction. 2 women, 2 possibilities, and me feeling increasingly trapped between them. During the moment of silence, I closed my eyes and finally admitted to myself what I'd been fighting for months. The feelings I had for Sarah weren't going away. Despite the complications, despite the professional boundaries, despite Julie's honest affection, my heart had made its choice long ago. The realization brought clarity rather than peace. What good was knowing what I wanted if it remained impossible? After the ceremony, people lingered in small groups, sharing flood stories and recovery plans. I found myself standing alone near a memorial wreath when Julie approached. "Hey," she said softly. "You okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "This whole thing, it makes you think about what matters." Julie studied me for a long moment. "You've figured it out, haven't you?" "Figured what out?" "What you want." Her smile held a trace of sadness. "Who you want?" I didn't deny it. I owed her that much honesty. "For what it's worth," she continued, "I think she feels the same way. The question is whether either of you is brave enough to do something about it." Before I could respond, she leaned in and kissed my cheek. "I hope you find your happiness, Bailey, even if it's not with me." She walked away before I could formulate a response, disappearing into the crowd with dignified grace. I stood frozen, processing her words, when a text message vibrated in my pocket. "Meet me at my car. We need to talk, Sarah." The parking lot was deserted except for Sarah's blue sedan. She leaned against the hood, arms crossed, expression unreadable as I approached. "You wanted to talk," I said, stopping a careful distance away. "I saw you with Julie just now." Her voice was carefully neutral. "She was saying goodbye." Sarah's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Goodbye?" "She knows," I said simply. "About my feelings for you." The admission hung in the air between us. Sarah uncrossed her arms slowly. "Bailey, I've been offered a coaching position with the state division." My stomach dropped. "You're leaving Henderson?" "It would solve many problems," she said, not meeting my eyes. "No more conflict of interest, no more rumors. Clean break for everyone." "Is that what you want? A clean break?" I fought to keep my voice steady. "What I want." She laughed without humor. "What I want doesn't align with my career goals. What I want risks everything I've worked for." "Say it," I challenged, stepping closer. "For once, just say what you want." Her green eyes flashed. "You know what I want." "No," I insisted. "I need to hear you say it." "Why? So we can torture ourselves more?" She pushed off the car, frustration evident in every movement. "I want you, Bailey. I have since that first night at the theater. But wanting isn't having." "My career. Is that all that matters to you?" I interrupted, my own frustration boiling over. "Your career?" "Of course not," her voice rose. "But I've worked my entire life to get here. Am I supposed to throw that away for what exactly? What are we even talking about here?" "Love," I said simply, the word falling between us like a thunderclap. Sarah stared at me, shock evident in her expression. Neither of us had used that word before. "Bailey," she finally whispered. "We can't." "We can," I insisted. "There are other coaching positions, other teams, but there's only one." I hesitated, then finished, "One us." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they shimmered with unshed tears. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Not just of losing my career, but of this, whatever this is between us. It's overwhelming." I stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her. "I'm scared too. What if it doesn't work?" Her voice was barely audible. "What if we risk everything and then discover we're not?" I silenced her doubt with a kiss, pouring months of restrained emotion into it. When we finally broke apart, her breath came in short gasps. "That's why," I said against her lips. "That's why it's worth the risk." She pressed her forehead against mine. "The Federation is reviewing my position," she murmured. "They're concerned about the rumors. I might not even have a choice to stay. Then we'll figure it out," I promised. "Together." For the first time in months, Sarah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Together," she repeated, like she was testing how the word felt. 3 weeks after the memorial service, the Volleyball Federation delivered their verdict. Sarah and I sat together in her living room as she opened the email on her laptop. "Ready?" she asked, finger hovering over the mouse. I nodded, though my stomach was in knots. This decision would determine whether she could remain as Henderson's coach or would be transferred to the state division. Her eyes scanned the screen, expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. "They're creating a coaching restructure," she read aloud. "I'm being offered the position of division coordinator, overseeing multiple teams including Henderson." "What does that mean?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "It means," she said, closing the laptop and turning to me, "that I would no longer be your direct coach. I'd oversee the program, but day-to-day coaching would fall to someone else." The implications sank in. "So, technically," she finished, "there would no longer be a direct conflict of interest." The relief was overwhelming. After months of tension and uncertainty, we finally had a path forward. 2 months later, at the season-ending charity game for flood victims, Sarah made her first public appearance as division coordinator. The Henderson Stadium was packed with supporters, both for the team and for the recovery efforts. I spotted Julie in the crowd, now heading the county's disaster preparedness program. She gave me a genuine smile and a thumbs up. Whatever heartache she might have felt had transformed into something like friendship, a transformation I couldn't help but admire. Our team played brilliantly that day, the months of hardship somehow forging us into a more cohesive unit. When the final point was scored, the crowd erupted in cheers. Amid the celebration, I found Sarah's eyes across the court. She nodded slightly, a private signal after weeks of careful planning. It was time. At the post-game interview, I stepped up to the microphone after discussing the team's performance. "I have a personal announcement," I said, heart pounding. "This will be my last season with Henderson." The reporters immediately began shouting questions. "I've accepted a position as assistant coach with the state university," I continued when they quieted. "I'll be working under their women's volleyball program starting next month." More questions followed, but I only answered the ones about my coaching aspirations. Sarah and I had agreed we would build our relationship away from public scrutiny, at least initially. My move into coaching created a natural transition away from player status, further removing any professional conflicts. 6 months later, on a warm spring evening, Sarah took me back to where our story began, the rooftop terrace of the Henderson Community Theater. They were staging a revival of Intersections of Desire, the pretentious experimental play that had brought us together. "Feeling nostalgic?" I teased as we stood overlooking the city lights. "Something like that," she replied, unusually nervous. "Do you remember what you thought when you first saw me here?" "That you were the most captivating woman I'd ever seen," I admitted, "and that I'd probably never see you again after that night." She laughed softly. "And instead, here we are." "Here we are," I echoed, taking her hand. The past 6 months had been transformative. My coaching position allowed me to stay connected to the sport I loved while developing new skills. Sarah's role as division coordinator had expanded, earning her recognition throughout the Federation. We'd built a life together quietly, letting our relationship develop away from the complications that had initially defined it. "Bailey," she said, suddenly turning to face me fully. "When I saw you across that theater, I never imagined you would become the most important person in my life." Something in her tone made my heart race. "Sarah?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small box. My breath caught as she opened it, revealing a simple but elegant ring. The journey to get here wasn't easy, she continued, voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. But every complicated moment, every obstacle we overcame, only proved what I think we both knew from that first kiss, that some connections are worth fighting for. She took my hand. Bailey James, will you marry me? The lights of Henderson spread below us, the same city where we'd struggled, suffered, and finally found our way to each other. The same city that had nearly been destroyed by flood, only to rebuild stronger than before. Yes, I whispered, then louder. Yes. As she slipped the ring onto my finger, I couldn't help thinking about all the moments that had led us here. From that chance theater meeting to the flood that forced us to acknowledge our feelings, from the painful separation to the brave decisions that finally allowed us to be together. When she kissed me on that rooftop, with the stars emerging above us, I knew we had created something rare and precious. A love that had withstood not just natural disaster, but the more complicated floods of professional ethics, personal fears, and societal expectations. And like Henderson itself, we had emerged stronger for having weathered the storm.